Well, I'm not intimately familiar with that program. Many of the policies you see here are geared for teachers while they're actually in the workforce. And the key reason for that is to kind of decrease these high turnover rates that I pointed out earlier, the fact that 15% of the workforce is leaving each year. There's been a number of research studies that show that the majority of teachers who are hired are replacing teachers who recently left the profession, and only a small fraction of those who are actually leaving are leaving due to retirements.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think they've provoked more questions from us than answers. All right, thank you very much. Our next presentation is by Linda Darling-Hammond. She's Professor Emeritus of Education at Stanford University, and she's president of the Learning Policy Institute. And they've just issued a new report on the state's emerging teacher shortage, and it discusses recommendations on how to address the issue. So welcome, Linda. Hi, thank you.
Need to press this button, or am I on? I'm on.
You're on.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm gonna, you have a report in your fat binder, which I'm gonna quickly draw out some high points from, and then we can talk about the recommendations. We looked at the data we could find to the point that was made earlier that it is a process to search for data in California, but we did look at the data that exists and kludged it together from several sources, and I think the picture is fairly clear about where we are in the shortage arena. As you know, if you look at sort of the headlines that came out in the fall, all over the state, we were hearing about teacher shortages. We've been hearing about them at the Teacher Credentialing Commission. I serve as the chair of the CTC, and this has been a very big topic of conversation, and many of you have experienced it personally in your districts. One of the outcomes of that is that underprepared teachers in California are on a steep rise. Somebody asked earlier, where are we with respect to interns and other credentials? This is on page 3 of the report that's in your binder. And here's a picture of it. Over the last 3 years, we've had a 63% increase in the number of people coming into teaching who are unprepared or in the process of getting prepared but have not completed their preparation. Interns grew from about 2,600 to about 3,400 of those, but the total is about 7,700. So the rest of those are typically people who do not have either subject matter competency or pedagogical training and have not even begun a teacher education program. The largest increase is in those who are the least prepared. So they can only be hired in times of acute shortage, and that's rapidly increasing. How big is that as a share of the teaching force? Well, I'll come back to that. Of course, this is deja vu all over again. We have experienced this in the state before, and back in 2000, when we had 40,000 teachers on emergency credentials, which are the equivalent of those that I just identified, we had about 10 times as many of those teachers in high minority schools as in low minority schools, and in high poverty schools there was a disproportion as well. So we are already seeing both the unequal distribution of underprepared teachers and a steep growth in the number of such teachers. We did a poll with EdSource, a field poll, asking California voters what they wanted to see happen as a result of the shortage. First of all, 2/3 of them thought the shortage was very serious. 90% thought it was serious, and 9 out of 10 thought that the state should address this with respect to salaries, with respect to being sure that teachers get the preparation they need, including a full year of student teaching that will let them stay in the profession. And more than half said they did not want the shortage addressed by just reducing the expectations for teachers coming into the profession, because people have seen that before. This is the list of discontinued teacher recruitment programs that, a partial list of those that helped us climb out of the shortage the last time we experienced it. We did almost solve the shortage situation in that period in the early 2000s. This was partly because No Child Left Behind made some requirements of states to eliminate emergency credentials and to put policies in place, and partly because the state was responding. But all of those are either dramatically reduced or gone. So here's where we are. These are teacher preparation enrollments. Over the course of the last decade or so, we've had a 76% decline in the number of teachers coming through California teacher education institutions. As you know, about 55% of the teachers are produced in the UC or CSU systems, with the CSU system being the larger of the two. The rest are in a variety of different kinds of private colleges and universities and programs. And because of the declines with budget cuts, the fact that that was decreasing and credentials were decreasing was not a problem until recently, when in 2015, demand shot up for the reasons that our LAO colleagues identified. As money was coming back into the system, districts began to try to rehire teachers who had been laid off. We have the highest pupil-teacher ratio in the country. It's about 24 to 1, as the national average is 16 to 1. It had been climbing, larger class sizes and larger pupil loads, and in part people are trying to get back to pre-recession levels, which will still leave us well above the national average in the number of students per teacher, but a little less so than we are currently. I'll talk about other demand issues in a moment. So today, more than 40% of new credentials and permits that are issued by the CTC are for underprepared teachers. And that's been dramatically increasing over the last 3 years. 4 or 5 years ago, that was down to about 10% or less, and it's now just been skyrocketing since. Here's the other piece of it. There are new teachers beginning to pay attention to the labor market and say, gee, maybe I will go into teaching, because there are jobs when there weren't before, and the pink slips that Senator Allen talked about, you know, are a little fewer in number now, et cetera. But they're not going into the fields where we need them. So math and science credentials are still declining for fully prepared teachers. By 32%, the number on substandard credentials is increasing. So even though we've got more people coming in, they're not coming into math. And as you can see here, they're not coming into science either. And the same thing is true for special education. The number of special education teachers is declining, as you can see by the size of the pie. The share that are coming in without full credentials is increasing, and it's now almost half of the teachers who are teaching our neediest, most vulnerable students are likely to have the least training, and a large share of them are those, what we fondly call PIPs and STIPs in CTC jargon, which are individuals who may not be in any program at all and have any training at all, teaching the kids who need the most expert teaching. And to the point that was made about the medical programs, medical fellowship programs, I do have a different take on that literature. There are a number of studies, a lot of them at the federal level. When you have that problem in medicine, the federal government covers the training of the people in those specialty areas so that they will be able to fill those positions, and it's had quite a lot of success. So demand is likely to continue to increase. As I mentioned, we need many districts are going to continue to try to return to pre-recession student-teacher ratios. Just to do that would require us to hire 60,000 teachers on top of all the other sources or needs for teachers. Retirements are not out of the picture yet, although they are about a third typically of leavers are retirees. We have 10% of our teaching forces over the age of 60. And you could pretty much go now, that's my people, but you can pretty much count on them to be retiring in the next 5 to 10 years. Not too many are going to stay on in the longer run. About a third are over the age of 50. So in some districts, this will be a very important element. San Diego told us that they expected 1,000 retirements next year. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that varies from place to place.
Senator Allen?
I'm just so interested in the historical story being told by this chart. You know, with regards to about 10 years ago, the peaks, there's a peak of the younger teachers and the older teachers, and that's of course been shifted Could you just tell us what that story is?
Well, we had a kind of bimodal teaching force in 2006-07, which is, as you say, a lot of younger teachers way over on the left in the black line.
Yeah.
And then this older, really big retirement cohort and a retirement-ready cohort. And a bunch of them have left. And during the recession, a lot of districts had early retirement incentives to, get people to leave. So that was effective. So the number of people who are poised in that end is smaller than it was. And we have more people now sort of in the middle. But we do still have this tail, and it is still a significant number in some districts of teachers who are going to be leaving. So it will vary from place to place. We also have pretty much flat enrollment trajectories. However, in some counties, they will see more than a 10% increase in enrollment gains. So it's going to vary from place to place, which factors are the most important. 2/3 of leavers, however, are leaving for non-retirement reasons. And those are the ones that matter a lot. And a lot of people have asked me, I'm going to talk about what I think might be some useful strategies, but many people say, what can we do right now? The thing you can do right now is keep the teachers you have. You should focus on retention because that's the biggest part of the attrition. There's a lot of research, and we summarize some of it in that report about what matters in recruiting and retaining teachers. Obviously, the attractiveness of the profession, which is only partly about salaries. It's also about whether you have the working conditions that allow you to be effective with children, which is, once people get in, sort of the most important thing that keeps them in. A lot of that has to do with the principal and so on. But if you're a young college student, also hearing good things about the teaching profession, knowing that it's respected, those things can make a difference as well. Compensation, as we heard before, can be very important, but compensation comes in many forms. And while salaries are known to be helpful in getting people in, they're less of a factor, although they do matter in keeping people. But they're extremely expensive as a state policy strategy. If you sort of assume that of our 300,000 teachers, they were making about $50,000 each, which would be a very low average, it's probably higher than that, we'd have it significantly, but that would be $15 billion. And if you wanted to increase salaries for teachers by 10%, you're talking $1.5 billion. In contrast, things like forgivable loans and scholarships, which have been proven effective in the federal grants programs that have been better researched than the states, and then there are some others like the North Carolina Teaching Fellows that have been researched, might cost you $20 million, $30 million a year, depending on how many you want to get in, focused on people in shortage areas going to high-need fields. The difference in the cost of raising everyone's salaries and targeting compensation that relieves debt can be significant. For young people, about 80% of the people who come into teaching are first-generation college students. And if you say to a first-generation college student who has gotten where they are because of their education, who's often very committed to wanting to give back in that way, that if you will teach, we will pay for your education, the evidence suggests you get a pretty substantial response from people saying, yeah, I would really like to go into teaching. 80%, yeah. And that's been pretty consistent over much of the century. It is it has been configured for many people as a first-generation career. But compensation does matter. It comes in many forms. Preparation matters. People who are fully prepared when they enter teaching are half as likely to leave over the first 5 years, and they're half as likely to leave even in the first year. So if you're better prepared, you're likely to feel competent, more effective, and that keeps you in. Mentoring matters, as we heard a moment ago. Much higher retention rates for people who get solid mentoring, as you know. We have that in some of our districts, but we have a frayed, sort of a tattered mentoring safety net in the state right now. And then teaching conditions matter. Probably the most important one is the quality of the principal and the degree to which the principal creates collegial, supportive working conditions that enable people to succeed. What might we think about doing in California? I've put a little box around the recommendations that are most amenable to state action. Some things obviously are local. Let me just say before I get into this that on the attrition front, which I mentioned earlier, keeping teachers in, if we were able to reduce attrition from the 8% of people who leave the profession, that's a national estimate that our LAO colleagues also quoted, down to 3%, which would be closer to what you see in most countries internationally. Most countries have most high-achieving countries have teacher attrition rates of 2 or 3%, not 8%. If we just did that, we would cut our demand in half, and we would be able to fill it with the people we're producing now. So if we fill positions with high attrition options, then we're going to have a continual gerbil wheel that we have to meet. Many administrators have told me that the CalTeach program was extremely helpful to them. That existed back when we were addressing shortages before. It did public service announcements, said come into teaching, be a hero, we need you. It allowed people to come to a central clearinghouse and find where they could get prepared, where they could get financial aid, where they could find jobs. They reached out across the country to recruit nationally. That's important now because we are in a national teacher shortage, and other states are coming here and poaching the teachers we're producing. Nevada is the most nefarious poacher near our border. They have huge growth in Clark County, and they will come, and they're at all the job fairs, and say, come to Nevada, we'll give you, you could get a better house at a lower price. We'll give you good signing bonuses and so on. We have no way to poach the teachers from other states, even those that have surpluses. And there are some in the Midwest where they have more teachers being produced because they have a lot of teacher producers relative to the number that they are hiring because they have declining enrollments. So that would be a small kind of allocation, a few $1 million to recreate that capacity, perhaps in a county office or in a set of hubs around the state. Service scholarships and forgivable loans, the Apple, the CalTE, and the Governor's Fellowships are the ones you're familiar with. There was a study that was done by Dick Murnane at Harvard University and his colleagues about Apple and the Governor's Fellowship. They found that both of them were successful in keeping people in high-need school districts. They were trying to see if there was a marginal additional value of the Governor's Fellowship, and they did find that about 2 out of 7 of those Governor's Fellowship folks were recruited just by that program beyond what would have happened with Apple alone. But both of them did get people to high-need communities and kept them there. And that retention issue is a really strong one. Usually they come with a service agreement that in return for taking the loan, you will stay in the fields or locations for 4 years or more. Usually if a person makes it into the 4th year of teaching, they're a lifer. They've committed, they've gotten over the hump, they've learned to teach. Now, people do still leave, of course, later, but the rate of leaving is much smaller after that 3rd year. And I think one of the reasons that we need to think about this is that unless we have incentives for people to go into math, science, special ed, bilingual, ESL, we will get more teachers as young people hear that there are jobs. But what's happening right now is they're going into elementary education. They're not going into the fields where they're most needed. So we're going to need to reach and incent people to come into the places where they're needed. Early pipelines into teaching can be helpful. We have had the Career Pathways Trust, large sum of money. We have not had, although there are many places around the state that have proposed to start teaching academies for high school students, we have not had an allocation of funds for that purpose. That would be out of existing money, but a way to really allow high school students to come along. Some states like South Carolina have done a lot with the high school student population in bringing them through. We've had Grow Your Own programs that build on the people who are already in communities, paraprofessionals, for example, who've already committed to that community and enabling them to get through a teacher credentialing program so that they can take on a full-time teaching job. Here's the thing that is really important for California. We've traditionally, since 1970, when the Ryan Act was passed, had all of our teacher education at the post-baccalaureate level. So if you want to teach, you've got to get all the way through undergraduate school and then get to that fifth-year program. And meanwhile, we've got a lot of young people trying to figure out what to do with their lives in undergraduate programs. We've got a growing amount of content we want them to know. We've added requirements for technology and teaching special needs students and bilingual students and so on. And we're still trying to cram it into that fifth-year program. And we aren't using the undergraduate space. So we now have sort of removed the legal and regulatory barriers to using the undergraduate space. But we don't have very many programs there. And one of the things that could be very productive would be to plant programs through a competitive grant process, to plant programs in the high-need areas. We don't have enough programs for special education teachers. In fact, most of the programs that have been withdrawn or closed in the CSU and UC system have been in these fields where we need them the most, and plant really productive blended programs in special education and in math, science, some of these other fields. UC has a very lovely small program that gets math and science teachers going in the undergraduate space, but it's tiny. It could be enabled to grow. So I think that building our capacity is one way to do it. And then the final thing I want to talk about is teacher residencies, which are a new innovation spreading across the country. We have about a dozen of them in California, and they really address an acute need in high-need districts. Typically what we do is we bring people in, they may be, kind of passing the breath test that they're, a warm body, but not prepared. They may flounder. If they're not prepared, high numbers of them tend to leave. You get churn. You don't solve the problem. These programs bring candidates in. They may come out of the military or other careers. They may come straight from undergraduate who want to teach in those districts. Put them under the wing of an expert teacher, one of the best teachers in that district, or sometimes it's a consortium of rural districts. Wraparound coursework for the credential, tightly linked to that, enable them to get 2 years of mentoring thereafter, reduce their financial obligations for tuition or eliminate them entirely, give them a stipend. Usually it's a small salary. And then they are asked to commit to that district, or if it's a rural consortium, to that group of districts for, usually it's about 4 or 5 years. It depends on the program. Very high retention rates, very high rates of competency and satisfaction. Districts are getting people who will become leaders and stay and train the next generation rather than getting churn. I think another thing that California could explore is helping the existing residency programs to expand and allowing the growth of others. And there is you may have been given a copy of a little summary of teacher residencies. That gives you a little of the data. In general, more than 80% of candidates stay. San Francisco, for example, 97% of their residents are teaching somewhere. 80% have stayed in San Francisco for more than 5 years, compared to 38% of the other new teachers they hired in the last 5 years. So big differentials. And 100% of the principals say they're better than the teachers who come out of any other pathway. And they stay and meet the math, science, bilingual ESL needs in those districts. So I think that's another possibility as a program investment. Finally, a lot of things can be done at the local level, and you can think about whether you want to incentivize any of those. But much of that is local. The things like mentoring is on the docket of local districts now. incentives to provide housing support. Some districts are doing that, in the Bay Area especially. Being sure that we are making it easy for re-entrants to get in and out-of-state entrants to get in. That's a CTC matter in part, and one that local districts can help with. I want to mention retiree options as a last thing. We have a law that makes it difficult for retirees to earn more than a small amount of money in a government organization. But it is also true, and there are good reasons for that, the concept of double dipping. But if people who were to be hired as retirees were also required to pay into STRS while they are working during that period of time and not withdrawing from STRS, it would be revenue neutral. So there are some things that might be done in that regard as well. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from members? Senator Pavley?
On the difficulty we have in attracting teachers from other states who had been teaching successfully for 10, 15 years, what are those challenges? Linda, I know I've talked with people who had been, let's say, successful teachers in Colorado, and they come in and they face different requirements, and they're juggling 38 kids in their classroom 5 periods a day, and then going to, a college at night, 2 nights a week to take all different courses that we require over than what they had. Yeah. And it just drains them, and they're in tears, and they end up quitting. So have we done anything better on how to pick those that are really have shown that they're successful teachers in a state that has similar credentialing programs?
Yeah, there was some legislation, probably back in 98, 99, somewhere around there, that expanded reciprocity. We didn't really have reciprocity at a moment in time, so people would come in and they'd have to get a 5th year and do all kinds of things. Right. So it's better than it was, and we have streamlined it quite a lot. But there may be more that can be done. It should be looked at this time. Quite often, although this is changing, states did not have requirements for candidates to have training to teach English learners, and that is something that we do require. If you come in from another state, then you should be able to take some kind of coursework to be sure that you're ready for our students. But more and more states are including that training in their credentials now. But I think in general it's better than it was, but we ought to be mindful and keep looking at whether there are ways to both bring re-entrants in when they have to become re-credentialed and new entrants with the minimum amount of extra hassle that's not related to their capacity to teach.
Yeah, because they're taking those classes while they're teaching a full load, and that's
But it is better than it once was. We're getting about 3,000 teachers a year from out of state right now.
Okay. Senator Hancock?
I'm interested in the difficulty in attracting math and science teachers. Now, to what degree is that related to compensation and the fact that a science major or math major may go into engineering or other fields where they can make a great deal more money? And do you think it's justified to do a 2-tier system of compensation to try to attract?
Some districts already put math teachers, for example, at step 2 or 3 when they hire them as a first-year teacher, so there are some places doing that. It is an opportunity cost. It's a differential between what you can earn in some fields and teaching, and it's most pronounced in math and science. There are also very few math majors coming out of colleges. Very few people take up that major and very few make it through. So then you got to share them with all these other occupations. So we have another set of problems around that which need additional attention. So yes, but I think that the question of whether you would end up having a different salary schedule for them is a really tough question, because if you talk to, I was a high school English teacher, I've talked to many of them, grading 150 essays every week. You ask teachers, well, is that teacher working harder than this teacher? They're going to say, no, that doesn't seem fair. So that, there is a salary schedule question that would have to be worked out locally. So I don't think it's much of a state policy to say, we hope you locals will work that out in some way, which is why I think you need other incentives as well that the state can put in play. North Carolina Teaching Fellows is one of those that did the service scholarships. They dramatically increased the number of math teachers by saying, if you will teach math, we'll pay for your college education. And, they required a 4-year commitment, and 90% of them stayed in well beyond the 4 years. There was an evaluation at the 7-year mark.
Do you think?
And I think what that does is it says you're not going to go in with debt. And see, the issue of student debt is getting worse and worse in this country. And if we want people in these fields where we're expecting altruism, you have to find a way to remove the debt if you're going to have a chance at, making the case for these kinds of fields in relation to salaries. And, that makes a big difference in the early part of the career.
So, yeah, I think that loan forgiveness is huge, and fortunately, we have some bills out there to deal with that. Do you think that having the CalTeach program really reach out to math and science majors? I would imagine there are a number of young people who really love math, but who don't want to get into the really highly technical and philosophical aspects of a career in mathematics, who could be attracted to the profession
absolutely.
with the right set of incentives.
And we have a lot of career changers who, want to come and, give back. We have a highly technical workforce in California. So I think, yes, reaching out through CalTeach both to career changers, to those who are coming through undergraduate, planting programs in the undergraduate so you can snatch people as they are getting interested rather than telling them to wait. All of those things, I think, can make a difference if they are coordinated.
Okay.
Okay, and then just could you comment on the attractiveness of the profession? It has seemed to me that there was a period of time, maybe early to mid-2000s, when teachers were being targeted as, you need a really good teacher in every classroom, damn it, and it's their fault if all these kids aren't learning to our new high standards, et cetera, which I've heard from some teachers is a big disincentive. It lowers morale, and it ignores the fact that social conditions play so much into the problems that we have making sure every child learns.
No, I think that there has been a discourse that has kind of blamed all of the ills of the system on the backs of teachers, even while the state was cutting funds and poverty was increasing and homelessness has doubled, and, making it all the teachers' fault. And not respecting teachers is a part of what young people hear when they're considering these kinds of occupations. I've done international work in places like Singapore and Finland and China and so on. And the respect that is just given to teachers is expressed constantly from the prime minister and the president and the leadership of the country, and then translated into, in all of those cases, completely free preparation for all people who will teach, completely free professional development, lots of opportunities for continuing to become expert and then being recognized for that expertise. We have a long way to go, even though we are the 8th largest economy in the world, to behave in the way that those countries behave about teaching.